Hi, this is Scott Shepard of Scott Shepard Photography, Watertown, South Dakota. And this tutorial is really an explanation of some assignments that are pending for my Lake Area Technical Institute photomedia classes. Both my first and second year students are working through these tutorials, which is part of a series of lessons called Shooting Flash Like a Pro. So I'm not sure that this video will have much meaning for those outside the range of my classes. So let's get to it. There are several things that I've assigned. I've assigned my students to do something called dragging the shutter. I've talked a little bit about using fill flash in my second year class especially. And I've also talked a little bit about shooting flash in a mixed light environment and the results you get, which aren't always pretty. And then finally, I've also talked about flash exposure compensation, using on-camera controls to boost or diminish the power of the on-camera flash. But before I do any of that, I want to talk a little bit about sync speed, because I have talked more than once about the fact that Canon cameras have a maximum sync speed. And we've discovered that it's at 1/200th of a second. And I just wanted to show you a picture of what happens when you try to take a flash picture at a higher sync speed. You'll notice that my shutter speed is 1/400th of a second here. I'm using studio strobes. If you try to do this with the on-camera flash, it will let you take the picture, it just won't be exposed properly. So you get a black chunk of the screen because the shutter is not syncing with the flash. Now the opposite is not true. You can set your camera shutter speed to very low settings and get interesting things even with flash. And here's an experiment that I did way back when the weather was nicer and the grass was green. The shutter speed is 2.5 full seconds here. And my mission was to try to get exposure on the subject, me, that was decent and done with the flash, and then exposure on the rest of the scene just using the timed exposure and the available light. And so in a way, I suppose you could call this dragging the shutter as well. There's just no blur in this picture because the camera's on a tripod and I stood pretty still for 2.5 seconds. But when you use dragging the shutter, you can get some interesting artistic effects, and this would be an example. Here I have the shutter speed set to 1/15th of a second, and I just move the camera laterally as I took the picture. And what's interesting is that the flash will freeze certain elements in the picture, including text and so on, which if you were trying to hand hold this without flash, you would have a hard time getting any kind of sharp edges on text. In this particular example of dragging the shutter, I focused on the ball with the word faith on it in the center of the picture, and I just turned the camera. In this particular case, the shutter speed is about 1/2 second. And I tried it again, not quite so artfully, using Mark R. Mannequin, and you'll notice that this is 1/6 of a second. Now the secret to getting good pictures here is that you need to be working in a room where there is some ambient light, but not too much. And the reason I converted both of these to black and white is that I ended up getting kind of ugly white balance issues, and that was not the nature of this assignment. What I will be looking for in this assignment is that you have something that is absolutely sharp in the picture. I picked something with text in this case. If you look at the Mark Mannequin shot, you'll notice that the label on his neck is sharp. The next assignment was to set up and shoot in a place where you're going to get two clear different colors of light. In this case, it was a decoration in our living room that I've centered the camera on. I'm using the on-camera flash, by the way. And there are two incandescent lights that are lighting the room. And I have the camera set to program mode, and I also have it set to auto white balance, I believe. And we're getting good white balance on the flash part, but we're getting a real ugly orange in the background. And that's what I expect to see in your pictures. If I see anything other than that, I'm going to say try again. Now, I shot this one, the same concept here, at Lake Area Tech in our photo gallery. Now, I got a little bit fancy on this one because I used flash exposure lock so that I could get good exposure on Mark, but then recenter the photo. I'm not telling you to do this. To make this simple, just pick something where you put it in the middle of the frame and shoot away. Now, if you want to impress me with the fact that you understand what flash exposure lock is, or FEL, go for it. The secret here is that I centered Mark first. I pressed the flash exposure lock button, which is the asterisk button on the back of the camera, recomposed, and shot. If I hadn't done that, the flash would have tried to expose for this area in the center of the picture. Okay. The next thing that I wanted my students to do, this is second-year students, by the way, is to experiment with something called Fill Flash. Now, I have a lot more to say about Fill Flash because I think it's a really important thing to use in when you're using on-camera flash. But I just really am going to explain briefly the assignment here. In this particular case, I set my subject up in a room that had decent ambient light, which is to say the light that is provided by the lighting provided in the room. And I put the camera on program mode. You can see that it's ISO 100, and I'm using f4 here. That's what the camera set because I believe it's on program mode otherwise, and I just fired away. Now what happens is that the camera is exposing for the main subject, and it's not doing anything to try to expose for the rest of the room. Same photo, same camera, same setup. The only difference is that I took the camera out of program mode and put it into aperture priority. I'm still using flash. And right away, the camera shifts how it exposes for the light in the room. In simple terms, what the flash does is exposes for the main subject, which it senses to be the subject closest and biggest in the frame. But it also will expose for the rest of the room as well. The secret here is that you have to make sure that you have an ISO that's high enough or an aperture that's low enough so that it can expose for relatively dim light in the room. Otherwise, you're going to have a shutter speed that's too slow. I'm actually under what I teach as the limit, which is the limit that I teach is 1/60th of a second, but I was holding the camera pretty still here. Now what I'm asking for this assignment is a side-by-side comparison of the same subject exposed as I've just described. And then finally, we also have built into the camera something called flash exposure compensation. I've shown you how to find that in the menu settings, and the assignment is to simply photograph the same three subjects. I would say use program mode for this if you want. You could put your camera on a tripod. I didn't. And it would be an absolute comparison side by side if everything is absolutely the same in the frame if you had used a tripod. So here's the assignment. You'll notice, by the way, that the settings don't change in terms of the metadata, but the light does. How does that happen? Well, in this case, I have powered, well, let's start with the main exposure. Here, the flash is exposing as it should be, as the camera is set by default. In this case, I turned the flash down 2 stops, I believe. I think that's maximum on the T3i. And it doesn't really look all that bad, but it is a little bit underexposed. And then I boosted it by 2 stops. Now, I've talked about the rationale for why you would want to do this. That's not the venue of this particular video. It's already long enough, quite honestly. But what I'm wanting is to have you demonstrate your ability to change the flash power settings. What I'm asking for you for output is a side-by-side comparison in aperture. And this is a screen capture, by the way. And so is the normal flash and fill flash a screen capture. Anyway, that's my quick explanation of what I'm expecting from you. Let me think about this. I'm wanting one dragging the shutter exposure. I'm wanting one photo that shows a mixed light setting. I'm wanting a screen capture that from my second-year students that shows an understanding of fill flash. A lot more about that in class and in tutorials. And then finally, a screen capture that shows flash exposure compensation. That's it. Thanks for listening.